3, 2, Juan.
Hello, welcome back to the Godfo Universe podcast. This is your host and co-creator of the Godfo Universe, Josh Adams, here with Dan Evans, my good buddy and also co-creator of Godfo Universe. Want to take a quick minute just before we dive into our topic today and thank everybody who watched our last video when we were discussing the kind of comparing and contrasting the Wolverine versus Archangel comic from Jim Lee and the more modern version. That one apparently struck a chord with you guys. So we had a lot of views and some good interaction. So thank you for that. Keep that up. And hopefully we'll have some more of that with this one. We're going to be talking today about manga. And I think we're going to do a series on this for the next few episodes, right?
Manga versus comics.
Yeah, manga versus the American counterpart of comic books. And that should be great. I'm looking forward to this because this is something you and I have talked about plenty of times, and it's going to be fun to dive into it. I think it's important too because like if you think about manga and how things have changed in regards to manga, like we've talked before about how anime was hard to find when we were growing up, or harder to find. I know that there was stuff like Dragon Ball Z and all the stuff that was on Adult Swim or on Toonami back in the 90s. So we started seeing a growth in that, well, at least with some really mainstream ones. But manga was even harder to find at your local comic book shop than the anime was. Manga was one of those things, if you got lucky, you might find one or two random issues in the back of a long box.
I think somewhere Akira was the only one that I could find as a kid.
And the main reason you could find Akira or Blade of the Immortal or some of those is because they were reprinted or republished through Dark Horse Comics.
Yep.
So that there were a couple of series that you could find because of Dark Horse, but beyond that, finding manga was really, really hard. It was very spotty. You couldn't collect it. That's for sure. But yeah, let's get into this. How did you want to kind of start this conversation, Dan?
Well, first of all, thanks everybody who's been checking in. I'm glad that last video struck a chord, so we're gonna pursue that a little bit more. The manga versus comic discussion has been like a really active one for the past couple of years because manga has just been absolutely destroying Western comics in sales.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is walk into Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
And you'll have 3 or 4 whole aisles of manga, and then like one little bookshelf of graphic novels.
And that's where the graphic novels were, and the graphic novels are all out of order. I can't find anything. And then the manga, this is what really made me know that it was destroying everything. Not only is the manga in order, it's right to left alphabetical order, which means they are conforming to the Japanese business model, which means, dude, you've just been completely demolished.
It's insane.
We dropped the bombs, but they got us back.
Dude, okay, so have you seen where, because of the Barbie Oppenheimer movie, the Barbieheimer thing, there's been memes, and some of the Japanese people apparently were very offended by that because, of course, their history with the atomic bomb is a dark and stain on their history. And so they started making 9/11 memes to show, like, for Americans to say, like, hey, now you know how it feels.
And they don't understand American humor, do they?
Americans love 9/11 memes. So that definitely backfired on them. Sorry, I had to go there when you said that.
No, I might have to search some of these while I've got maybe, I don't know. I might have to do that later. That has to be in a whole episode.
Sounds good. We'll do like a little a short episode on that.
Yeah.
We'll show them.
Like, what is it? Is it like Godzilla taking out the towers?
That would be so funny. Oh man, that would be
he's
funny.
between them like Samson.
But he has George Bush's face. Breathe, Dan, breathe.
Yeah, they missed the mark on that one, didn't they?
They don't know who they're messing with. they
we
underestimate how stupid we are.
We are already dead.
Osama bin Laden has the Fist of the North Star scars on his chest. Oh, woo! I'm crying.
Okay, as if you've made it through that.
You're still with us.
Oh man, I can imagine a million of them, and I bet we can do those memes better than they can.
Like that. Have you seen the memes from the anime where it's got the little cat that's speaking like really stilted English?
Yeah.
Hello, how are you? Fine, thank you. Have that thing like just show up and tear up the towers. Fine, thank you.
Or just have Frieza when he's like guiding Krillin up before he like cut to him going in the
man.
Anyway, okay, so it's been a discussion for a long time, but it's usually very short. And to be fair, you can give the reasons why, but it's usually like why manga is beating comics currently. But I wanted to do more of a deep dive into the differences, for good or bad, pro or con, historically and everything. Mm-hmm. Everything from art, which this will be what this episode is, the differences in art, and then story, themes, so on and so forth, and really do a big deep dive into it.
Yeah.
Because I love both of them. So let's just jump into it. Of course, most people are familiar, but if you're not, manga is just Japanese comics. American comics, I think, can make the claim that they did come first in the current format that we understand them and everything. There was an offshoot in like Europe, especially France. France had some really good comics. Was in the 70s that kind of changed the style.
France,
not
France
to get down
did
a rabbit
heavy
hole,
metal stuff, and then metal hurlant with artists like Mobius and stuff. Then you had in England, you had the 2000 AD stuff like Judge Dredd, that stuff was pretty dope too, and that was 70s, 80s. So there are some different branches of it, but I mean, comic books as we know them started here in the 40s, pretty much. 30s, 40s.
Well, manga traditionally, comic books have traditionally been, some of them have been black and white, mostly have been colored from day one. And of course, you have the big heavy hitters such as Jack Kirby. And the interesting thing about the history of comics, I'm trying to do it kind of short because we're not going to go into a 4-hour, EFAB explanation. Comics art style evolved really quickly. I think you can back me up on that. Like it went from early action comics and that kind of stuff that predated that was kind of like funnies in the newspaper, to Jack Kirby and that level of sophistication in a super relative short time. And I know Kirby wasn't the only one, but I mean, he's the king.
No, Kirby and Ditko and some of those. And I would say too that like the earliest stuff, you had a lot of romance comics. Mm-hmm. You had a lot of cowboy comics, Western stuff,
war propaganda.
You had the early, the propaganda. You had the early EC comic stuff, so crime stories and Tales from the Crypt horror stuff.
Some of it was just
pretty grody.
Some of it was just pictures in pulp novels, like 1 or 2 pages in a pulp novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really, it really is interesting to start with Kirby if you had to, because let's go ahead and get to the differences. Of course, manga is black and white. It's a completely different country, completely different culture. But the difference, one of the big differences, I think manga was originally put out weekly, correct?
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
American comics are put out monthly. So
Yeah, and typically too, a lot of the manga that we have now wasn't released initially in issues or volumes. It usually came out, and I think it may still in a lot of places come out in magazines. You get a little chapter at a time. You don't get like a full issue sometimes. You just get a chapter.
yeah, and then they collect them into volumes
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. So there's difference. There was page, were there page size differences at some point too between manga and
Mm-hmm.
comics, I believe, and there still are,
Mm-hmm.
at least when they're printed. So, but getting into let's dive deep into the art differences. Manga, correct me if I'm wrong, but manga has always been a little more stylized or a little less realistic.
Um. Hmm. I don't know if I could say that it's more stylized because I mean, if you look at Jack Kirby's work, Jack Kirby was fairly stylized.
I guess what I
Compared,
mean
he was
is,
actually compared to a lot of others,
yeah,
but stylized in different ways.
yeah. Well, I guess what I'm saying,
Um,
he tried to keep more believable faces and that kind of thing and
yeah,
shapes and yeah,
yeah,
okay,
yeah. I would agree with that. I would say that where American comics put a lot more focus on the anatomy and the uh, human form, the human face, and keeping that as normal as possible. I think that what we see with the manga is as detail wise as the backgrounds and
yeah,
the if there's a cityscape, if there's nature, if there's anything like that around, that's going to be insanely almost photorealistic detailed in a lot of manga,
well,
which
and,
is
yeah.
something that American comics didn't do for a long
That
time.
comes from a Eastern versus Western art background too, and I think Miyazaki went into this too when he studied American art and European art. Was he, of course, he was like, obviously has Christian influence, and that actually is what turned him off, was because of his religion
Mm-hmm.
versus was it Shinto, whatever they
Mm-hmm.
believe.
Yeah,
But that is a difference. One of the American was based off European art, especially Western culture, which was highly emphasizing the human form.
mm-hmm.
And like I said, I think the Eastern style, at least the Japanese style, which is more Shinto, if I'm saying that correctly,
You're right.
was about nature, was about surrounding, and less about the human form, and more about ego death and that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, for example, if you look at something like the very famous woodblock
The
print of
wave,
the Great Wave
yeah,
off of Kanagawa, you know, there are humans in that picture, but they're very small and they're very little low on detail.
yeah. Well, even like
So
a lot of their books
yeah, I
were,
mean, there's
yeah,
definitely a much yeah. Yeah, Hokusai focused a whole lot more, and all of his stuff is like that. More focused on the nature of Mount Fuji or anything like that, motion and all of that stuff, and a lot less focus on the human beings. When there's humans in the picture, they are almost an afterthought.
yeah. And so there's just different, and like this, like again, like the human form is a little more stylized, a little more cartoony, even I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and it also some of the stuff with the faces in the Japanese art is based also on the idea of the kabuki masks
yeah,
and the no theater stuff that they did, and those exaggerated faces as well.
and
Uh,
different types of ink, different types of
right.
paint, different types of paper, different things like that, all contributed to that history of artistic differences.
Yeah, but what you'll see is in traditional Japanese art, um, intricate detail on clothing, intricate
Yeah,
detail
colors, vibrant
on
colors.
on color and armor and scales and things like that. Whereas if you look at a Jack Kirby picture of Captain America, all right, so Captain America's his uniform has sort of a scaled, like the traditional uniform has sort of scaled armor to it, but you just get little hints of that scale, and not the whole thing is not fully detailed.
Yeah,
You just get enough to give you a hint of that texture, and that's it. a Japanese artist would probably have drawn every single scale meticulously.
Yeah, look how great the hair looks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know I'm jumping
Yeah.
around on the Japanese end, and we can search like some traditional manga. Oh, sorry.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Gonna have a big blur on this whole side of the.
Yeah, right. Well, I shouldn't have searched traditional. What would I be thinking of? Like, can you give me like an older manga artist?
Go ahead, put in Astro Boy.
Yeah,
That's a good
Astro
place
Boy,
to start.
which is based off Mickey Mouse, which is
Right.
another reason that if we do take the logical jump from Astro Boy, the manga and the drawing to manga, that kind of explains why it's a little more cartoony or stylized originally. Yeah, like that.
Right.
Great,
But I mean,
great art, though. Great art.
look at Astro Boy, and you see everything in Astro Boy from Goku and
Yep.
Dragon Ball Z to Mega Man. Like there's an iconic sort of
shape and form.
Yeah, to him and to the hair and all of that, to the eyes, that really carries through. So I mean, certainly a really iconic. So something like that. That's the Jack Kirby stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man,
That's what it's worth.
Gigantor.
It is worth noting that a lot of even today, but a lot of manga artists are phenomenal artists. Like when they stop and take their time, like I said, manga comes out once a month, and it takes a lot of skill to put something like this out, or sorry, once a week, and it takes a lot to put this out once a week. That's very hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see these dudes in their environment taking like a month's time to draw a comic, my goodness, they are.
Yeah, their passion projects are insane.
Yeah.
Put in Gigantor manga.
Mongo.
Bangos.
Nice. Oh yeah.
All right, so yeah, Gigantor gives us the first, like basically the starting point of Mecha. And then it goes out from there. But he's one of the first, maybe not the first, but he's one of the first. Of the young boy with the giant robot, friend, and then that goes on to Giant Robo, like we see there, and so many others. There's a simplicity to the form, but then there's also, like, even with simple forms, they have a way of going in and just really defining those things so well.
Yeah. Well, again, the beginning of Japanese animation as we know it, which probably is the beginning of Japanese because that's the Japanese animation because that's the only time the technology was there, is Disney. 100%. It is based off Mickey Mouse and those. I think even before Hanna-Barbera, probably straight Disney. It's probably like Steamboat.
Oh yeah, way before Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah,
Hanna-Barbera came in another decade or two later. Yeah, Disney was pretty well the.
But that's a nice comparison right there to see going from this to Cowboy Bebop, and you can see it. Like when you put them side by side, you can actually see just the evolution.
Yeah.
So so anyway, so there's a difference, and those are two different starting points. But in the jump ahead, and we'll come back because it doesn't have to be chronological order. We get to something like Jim Lee, of course, later on the American side, and then you get to something like Berserk, which I think kind of the same time, like was the 80s, 90s. But that evolution came just from guys really being dedicated to their art, being dedicated to it. But you can see the differences here, especially with manga, where they fill in everything. I don't know how they draw it. Do you think do they ink, or is this all just pencil work that they fill in with darkness?
No, it's inked.
Okay.
No, it's inked. They do a mixture of brushes and pens for the inking. What's interesting about a book like Berserk versus something like a Jim Lee piece, Jim Lee is going to leave space for color.
Yeah.
The colorist is going to come in and add more layers of depth and more, at least a good colorist is going to come in and put more depth more definition, more of a three-dimensional feel to it. So Jim Lee's going to get his darkest shadows black, then he's going to get, or whoever inks his work is going to ink in the dark shadows completely black, and enough hatching or cross hatching to show us the forms. And then they're going to leave room for a colorist. When you look at something like Berserk, every inch of that splash page is going to be hatching, cross hatching, because they know that there's not going to be any color coming in to add that depth. So I've got to do that with my pen or with my brush. I've got to create that depth myself. And to some degree, it's showing off. But I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If you can do it, why wouldn't you? I mean, you look at how expert his lighting is in that the Skull Knight, his shoulder, like we've talked so much about how modern comics do not understand lighting. This is the most perfect example of lighting and shadow I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, look at that.
Yeah.
It's hard, you can't even critique it. It's just perfect.
Well, yeah, it does give depth. Like, you feel like you're getting lost in it. Like, it goes...
Yeah.
You can actually see where it goes back, and you feel like you're looking back at something. Yeah, it's so much different than some of the stuff we reviewed last time.
Mm-hmm.
And I get and this isn't to change topic, but I've seen some guys recently in indie comics trying to mimic this, and they usually fail. And I'm not trying to be mean because I'm not an artist, but you know what I'm saying? They'll try to mimic this kind of style, particularly this Berserk style, and it just doesn't work.
Ahead, sorry.
No, it just doesn't work for some reason. It seems like theirs gets very messy.
Well, part of it is, from what I've seen, shortcut route and tried to do it with, instead of actually having to do all that hatching and cross hatching or stippling or whatever, they go in with a whatever brush they have on Procreate and just throw it in, and it's not going to be the same as somebody who sat down and took hours to draw every individual line like this.
Yeah.
It just isn't. The other half of it is a lot of times they just focus on, well, if I can put a lot of detail in, I'll have a page that's got so much to look at. But because there's no sense of form and there's no control over the lighting and the contrast, you don't have, like, this has big, bold sections that are just black.
Yeah.
And define where that horse's neck is and head, that define the background where the sky is dark, that define, all of the shadows on Griffith. And then there are other areas that are not as dark or not as light. And that you still get to have form. Whereas so many other artists in American comics that try to do this same thing, they fill every single inch of something with details, but they don't have that dark black space to break it up and to define any of the
exactly
forms.
it. Yeah, it seems like they have all this white space in it, and
then a colorist comes in and adds another layer of confusion to where now it's like a Where's Waldo paper. And I'm just trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be looking at. Whereas in this picture, I know exactly what it's trying to communicate.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I didn't know how to articulate it, but that's a lot. And it's just a few indie guys trying to do this style, and there's just so much white space, and it gets it. I don't know color theory or that kind of stuff for light theory, but you're right. Like again, your eyes need to be drawn into it and relaxed rather than repelled.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done some of the history, but you extrapolate from where comics started. Manga, and this is a topic that people gloss over. They talk about and gloss over, but it's true. American comics started as a wide variety and narrowed down to superhero.
Mm-hmm.
Because superheroes sold and did really well. And we got some of the greatest inventions ever from it. You got Superman, you got Batman, the X-Men, Spider-Man. You could just start with those four. If all you got was those four, you're set for life. Um, Manga didn't do that. Manga had a few hits, of course, things like that stood out, but their rise was a little bit slower, and it remained diverse in topic.
Well, part of it is because comic books
Hey,
from pretty
yeah, let me stop you there, though, 'cause, like, just to keep us on topic of this topic. I'm talking about art wise too, that defined how those things were drawn. We stayed with human forms, superhuman forms in American comics, but manga branched out into different types of art. So sorry, I just wanted to preface that.
no, that's fine. No, the point I was about to make is that part of the reason for that is that American comics have pretty much from the get-go were aimed at children. Even the EC horror comics, like Tales from the Crypt, so those were comics. They were brutal and violent and all, but they were aimed at children. That's why parents got so mad about them, and that's why we have a comics code authority in the United States, because parents were complaining about horror comics for kids.
Mm-hmm.
But like the primary audience for American comics was kids, whereas if you look at Japanese, some of the oldest Japanese manga, stuff like Lone Wolf and Cub, Crying Freeman, things like that. Those were Golgo 13, The Professional. Those were all very adult-oriented stories.
Even
so there was never a mindset. Yeah, there was never a mindset over in the East that this is a children's art form. They, from the get-go, they had children's stories, but then they also had adult stories. That medium was never attached to one audience the way it was in America.
Yeah. And that defined the art style.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, there's, like I said, with American comic, you're not saying an artist can't do something or shouldn't do something, of course. And I think, what's his name? And I always forget his name, and I love him to death, so let me look it up. He's one of my favorite artists ever. Artist for Witchblade and Soulfire.
Silvestri, isn't it?
Michael Lane Turner. And that's, I misspoke in the last episode. You said Silvestri, and you were right in one way, but I was meaning Michael Lane Turner.
I got you.
Yeah,
I got you.
One of my favorite artists of all time. I mean, look at that. My goodness. But that man could draw backgrounds. So, but what I'm saying is, I'm not trying to put American artists in a bubble, because they're not. People tend to think in ones and zeros. But that if you're like, hey, you're gonna make it in the comic book industry, and you're put to a test, they're not gonna say draw a background. They're gonna say draw Batman,
right.
Draw Spider-Man, draw
characters. Yeah.
Manga, you got to know how to draw characters, of course. But as stuff like Berserk proved, like this kind of, and Akira, especially Akira, it was, how does the environment look? And we're going back to that distinction. I think we kind of hit something there, that difference there. And that's not saying one's better than the other. It's just that's a difference. It's a key difference to harp on, I think.
Well, and when you look at the artwork, because of the diversity of audience in manga, a book like Astro Boy is going to have that more stylized cartoon look to it. But then if you looked at something like Lone Wolf and Cub or Crying Freeman in particular, you had a much more realistic and less stylized art in that manga.
Yeah.
Because it was more of an adult audience. And I want to get into that in a minute, but like there's a specific point I want to bring up about the approach to the two audiences in manga.
Yeah, go for it.
But if pull up Crying Freeman.
That's spelled how it sounds.
Yep, Crying Freeman. This is about an assassin, a Yakuza assassin, and the artwork for Crying Freeman, and that was a manga that would have more violence. It had sexual nudity and things like that.
But that focuses on the human form. That's a great
So for the adult stories, you had much more realistic human forms and human figures. I mean, it's so clear that how realistic the human form and the faces are there. Versus if you look at the Japanese approach to comics or manga for children, that's where we get our chibi stuff from.
Yeah, and eventually
yeah, it's the stuff like Hello Kitty and all that stuff.
Yo, Hello Kitty's awesome, man.
Yeah, I agree. And Totoro and Miyazaki, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But the stylization. Pull up that My Hero picture I sent you, if you still have that over there.
Yeah, I got it. It's coming. It's just got to load on the stream. There it is.
All right. So, My Hero, obviously a modern smash hit. The manga sells out like crazy. The anime is enormously popular. It hits every age bracket. It's not just kids that love it. Like, everybody loves this show and the manga.
It's X-Men.
So it's a, what's that?
It's X-Men.
Yeah, but better. But if we look at this page, this is a perfect marriage of both of those things. Like, there's a lot of the realism that we saw in the American, like, stuff. It's got the shading and stuff. It looks very much similar to what we see in Berserk. But the stylization of the face, that the big eyes, the little nose, all that stuff is the chibi influence of, there's still a kids audience, so let's make certain things cute.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever seen this or thought about this before, but I saw it pointed out to me. And once it was pointed out to me, I couldn't unsee it. Go up into the search bar and put in manga. Let's see, manga features based on cats.
I saw that. Yeah, somebody pointed that out. Yeah.
Yeah, that the idea that if you take these anime characters and the features that they have, so much of that is based on that's the image I wanted to pull up. Like, if you look at the profile, that side view of the anime figure beside a cat, you see the same shape of the forehead, the same shape of the nose and chin. The big eyes, all of that stuff, because cats are cute.
Yeah.
And so, and if you take that all the way back to stuff like Hello Kitty.
Hello Kitty in particular they spent a long time trying to find the cutest design. Like, they literally were like, and they did that with Pokemon too. Like with Pikachu, like, they spent hammered out, how do we capture and that's what I think that's actually they knew the idea of kawaii or whatever, or they tried to forge it. Like, how do we capture this idea of kawaii, like the cutest, appealing thing, protective feeling over something? Yeah.
Well, see, and that's why so many of those, even in the 80s and 90s, you had cat girls in the show that had tails and kitty ears.
Mm-hmm. And no one complained.
No, of course they didn't. But that's a very different approach.
Yeah.
Than what American comics, American comic books, even in the 40s and 50s when Jack Kirby and they were selling to kids. Those were comics written for kids, but they weren't trying to be cute.
Yeah.
To appeal to kids. They were actually, if anything, they were trying to keep kids engaged in more adult stories. It's interesting how many of the mangas have child characters, whereas American comics are sold to kids, but almost all of the characters were adults for the longest time, and even still.
Yeah, and like, we can run with that in just a second, but again, I think this goes back to Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because Mickey Mouse had that. I mean, he was a mouse, of course, but he had that longer, elongated shape. He didn't look like a mouse. But he had the eyes and the ears, and his side profile went out kind of like that. Yeah, and the big eyes.
And the bigger head, smaller body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally, I remember when I, as a kid, started losing interest in comics. We talked about this before. It was like 96, 97, that era when the art got a little more childish. And and I like the show enough, but X-Men Evolution and that kind of stuff. Well, I remember even as a kid being like, I remember when the X-Men were adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that. They were cool. Like, they were the dudes you wanted to be. Um, and it seemed like a lot of stuff American comics tried to go that direction a bit and tried to appeal, or they lost some of that masculine and adult edge, and
Mm-hmm.
it got worse.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah. But manga, it seems like it has versatility of style, of art style.
It does, and it
Yeah,
capitalizes on cute, and it capitalizes on exaggeration.
yeah.
I love whenever they have some kind of ridiculous, exaggerated comedy face
Mm-hmm.
pop up in the middle of a serious story.
Yeah.
And it always, like, I know that some people might look at that don't read manga or watch anime and see it and say, oh, that's stupid, but like I'm conditioned enough to it that I think it's hilarious when I have like one of those like ridiculous silly faces that they throw in there,
Yeah.
because they've mastered cute, and going all the way back to like kabuki theater stuff, no theater stuff, like we were talking, they've mastered exaggerated facial features and exaggerated expressions so that you can be seen from anywhere in the theater, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like, they're good at mannerism. They're really good at capturing that stuff, way better than a lot of American artists are.
But again, going back to, and I'm not trying to make a historical fact here, but there was a time when this stuff kind of coincided when you had probably Todd McFarlane even before Jim Lee a little bit, at least in the 80s when he was his Spider-Man run. You
Mm-hmm.
had stuff like this and Berserk. And
Yeah.
it was the top of the top quality that may have not been selling the most, at least McFarlane was. I don't think Berserk had reached its popularity peak yet. But those ideas,
Well, the manga came out in '97,
yeah.
and that's what catapulted Berserk into
Mm-hmm.
fandom. Is the anime came out, people loved the anime, and Dark Horse started printing the trade volumes of the series. That's kind of, so '97, early 2000. That's when Berserk really became a thing here.
Yeah, but I'm talking just like in its own country. Like I'm
Oh
saying,
yeah, yeah,
two
yeah,
different
yeah.
countries, but two different artists, and a couple of years difference, of course. But they were both elevating their art style, or their relative art style to the type
Oh yeah, they
the
were
type
definitely
spot. And
contemporaries,
and Akira, the guy who made
mm-hmm.
Akira, I always forget his name. Is it Anno? No,
Otomo.
that's
Otomo.
Evangelion. Yeah, but there's no getting away from that flux happened. There was that kind of bridging at one point. It
Mm-hmm.
reached the pinnacle. And we saw that in the
Yeah.
90s in American comics. 80s and 90s, it reached like its technical proficiency, like its top.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of went from there. But again, I think manga being flexible in its art form a little bit more than American comics. And I wish I knew more about the history, the business side. Maybe you do, but of course, in America, the two were DC and Marvel, which are superhero comics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how the manga industry works over there and how they're
I know
competing.
a lot of the manga over there goes through magazines.
Gotcha.
Um, so you had like Shonen Jump,
Yeah.
that would have Naruto and Dragon Ball and things like that, One Piece, those kinds of things would work through. Um, there were some other, there were like youth and teen culture is like a big thing over there and has been, especially in the 80s, 70s, and
Yeah.
80s. So like Akira Otomo did a lot of stuff that like ran through those kinds of magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny if you look at like the Akira art book that came with the big anniversary set that I have. You see like he had ads like all through those magazines that almost look like fashion ads,
Yeah.
just of Akira characters that just look in jackets and like outfits and stuff, fashion, and like teen cool fashion was a part of his thing. And so, it was more of a magazine industry at first,
Mm-hmm.
and then they started making volumes and stuff like that. But
going back to the cute style, the cat design,
yeah,
if that actually was, intent and not just a coincidence,
right.
nothing in American comics hit for girls the way Sailor Moon did in
Oh
Japan.
yeah,
And
yeah. Sailor
because
Moon was huge,
yeah, and
and was even
because of that
huge here.
style.
Like,
Oh yeah,
I
it
mean, my
was.
wife grew up watching Sailor
So
Moon
did
and loving
mine,
it.
and it's like, but they didn't, and she didn't associate it with Japan or anime. It was just a cartoon.
Mm-mm.
But
Yeah.
that cutesy style that men like and girls like, widely accepted,
Mm-hmm.
and it's why something like Sailor Moon was able to take off ridiculously. Like we just haven't had that kind of female acceptance of comics ever,
Mm-hmm.
even to this day.
So, put in the search bar Guyver
Look,
manga issue 1. And see if we can find some pages other than just the covers.
I remember
'Cause I
this guy.
wanted,
I remember this Apollyon guy.
yeah. So one of the things
Volume
about the
26.
early issues of Guyver, as the series went on, it got a little bit more berserkish with its artwork. But the early issues of Guyver, like Mizuki and some of the girl characters and stuff, it even showed like the main characters had the big Sailor Moon eyes and stuff. Like there was an
Yeah,
interesting overlap in styles where you had a more violent
yeah.
adult themed story with a lot more violence, a lot more blood and guts and stuff. But then the art still had the little chibi eyes and stuff.
Well,
And
they completely mastered that since then. Like,
oh yeah,
yeah.
that overlap, it's that blend is just like kind of perfected now. But yeah, the early Guyver stuff had that aesthetic mixed in with it.
Well, let's go with that, man, because Witchblade did that. I
It
mean,
did.
but it was a little more, of course, erotic, even more so than some of this, because it wasn't hentai, but close enough. Um,
It was pretty close.
yeah, but I mean, but it hit that marker that they were beautiful, well drawn, cute, or whatever, but then they were
Mm-hmm.
stabbing swords through like demon necks and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, which is how most people would define manga and anime. Like literally,
Yeah.
it looks cute, but they're killing demons.
Yeah. Witchblade was like that. You had stuff like what was it called? Lady Death was a little bit more Playboy
Yeah, Lady Death.
than but you had stuff like that was out. The Darkness had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that influence in it because even like the demons and stuff, he could control the darkness itself. They
Again,
all those
yeah.
little imps and things were very goofy with big eyes
And again,
and kind of cute but
those were indie
scary.
too. What we're describing that weren't part of the big two. And
Mm-hmm.
I know McFarlane, who started Image, got a lot of inspiration
All
from
right, so all
manga.
right, yeah, that cover right
Yeah,
there
right
that you've
there.
got pulled up. Yeah, pull that one up so we can see it bigger.
I don't know where this is gonna take me. Oh, kissmanga.org. Don't bust me for piracy.
But
That's
yeah, that cover that's exactly what I'm talking about. If you look at Mizuki's face when we can get it from behind those stupid
great.
ads.
Yeah, great.
All right, that's Sailor Moon all the way, dude.
And this guy's face wouldn't pass for manga today.
No.
Um, yep, that's exactly it. There's the wrist. Female characters often have limp, weak wrists.
Mm-hmm.
That's not me being some feminist chode.
No,
That's
it's just
just
the
observation.
mannerisms that they would
Well,
use to make them seem
look
like you would need
feminine.
to protect them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
they
that's
need protection in the
why do you
series.
think girls identify with it and dudes like it?
Yeah.
That's a good contrast too between that and that, where they know what they're doing.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a I don't know, that's just a good example of the overlap of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Uh the other thing I wanted to talk about from an art standpoint, can you pull up that Akira page I sent you?
Sure. Let's get out of kissanime.manga before they try to put something on me, or YouTube tries to bust us for piracy or something.
Arr, piracy. All right, so like first off, excellent composition of this page.
Yeah, it's interesting.
None of the boxes or panels are like
That's what I
perfect.
noticed when I first read it, especially the Ultimate Edition of yours. Like, no, he'd never use like straight lines.
Nah, it's the layout's phenomenal.
Yeah.
The motion and action is so cinematic. It's insane.
The only difference is, as we discussed last week, like this one here, if this were Lee or McFarlane, his hand would be coming out the page here.
Yeah,
and stuff like that. Yeah.
That bottom right panel of Tetsuo with the blood, that is
iconic.
That is just iconic. It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's just a perfect gesture. But what I love about manga is that, yeah, there are some times when you really see like phenomenally drawn buildings and cityscapes and nature and stuff. But then there's times when there's action happening. The background pretty much disappears and becomes just motion lines and a little bit of shading. That's what we
discussed last time. The difference between Jim Lee and modern is that he would do that, and a lot of those guys in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s would do that because they probably took it from manga or were inspired by it or whatever. But yeah, they would throw out the background to focus on the character and the movement instead of keeping a boring hotel room.
And you see this, and you see the same thing right next to it with the picture of Deku. You got electricity and motion lines, and that's all that's happening in that background.
Yeah, and this shows like the lines are important because they're going up, like he's charging, like he's getting ready to go up.
Yeah, they're coming out. Yeah, and then out from him. Here, he's powering up.
Overhaul here looks like he's moving forward, like he's coming. Like they know how that works. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot. To say about that. I mean, and Akira, of course, the most iconic shot of Akira is that the motorcycle, the bike slide, and that's such a simple frame shot, but it's nothing but movement, just yeah, and that's from the anime, but same thing.
But I mean, if we look at that the top corner where he's smacking the dude in the face, there's no background there. We just got a sound effect and emotion, but it sells it so hard. And like down, if we see the dude on the ground where he first hits the pavement, having him in the foreground, the sound effect breaks out of the panel, and then we have the bike smaller in the background skidding away and all those motion lines. It sells the motion and the action so much better than it would if every inch of that page was crowded with useless information.
It looks like a dark street, and even the Tetsuo image here, it looks like a motorcycle light is lighting him up. The way that it's the way the light. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there is clear inspiration from the start of manga. It was inspired by American comics. And many artists in the late 80s and 90s said they were inspired also by Japanese manga. So,
it was this back and forth of inspiration that's so cool. But now, for the most part, the Japanese market is way more successful than the American.
Well, if you look at
even though we've got all the movies and things, it doesn't even slow them down.
Well, there was a big change, and this kind of goes into sticking to art. The art, the influence from manga that a lot of American comics take now is the wrong influence. We had the character design. Americans had the character design down pat. They've started changing it to look more like manga, and that's how you lose the classical American fan base. That's how you lost me. They start using manga mannerisms. Like there's always somebody scratching their head like this and looking nervous. You know what I mean? Like the things that work in anime and manga do not work in American comics. And I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but you have to find the things that do work. And guys like Lee, McFarlane, and even Liefeld and a bunch of those guys figured that out. They knew what to
Yeah.
do that worked, and the template was there. So I guess what I'm saying is, what do you think happened? To me, it seems like the Simpsons problem, and I could be wrong. It seems like the Simpsons now is written by guys raised on Family Guy, and it seems like a lot of comics now in America are raised by people, written by people, drawn by people raised on manga.
Yeah, I think that's fair because, like, I know when I went back in the day, I used to have a subscription to Wizard magazine.
Yeah, wonderful magazine at
And
one point.
yeah, it was a great comic magazine. And back in the day, Wizard would have these segments where the artists were talking about, well, what are your inspirations, and where do you get your style from, and all that. And almost all the time, there would be somebody in that book talking about, I'm really inspired by so and so manga artist.
Yeah.
And it was always a thing. It was, those 90s comic book artists were huge anime manga fans, or at least a lot of them were. If they were here in America, most of them were anime and manga fans. They were collectors, and like that had a big impact on what they were doing. And you keep bringing up Jim Lee, and Jim Lee is very much an American comic artist, but he's an Asian.
Yeah.
Or at least Asian ethnicity, descent, whatever. I think he's been in America his whole life, or I assume he has, but he is Asian from an ethnic perspective. I'm sure that has to have some influence on the art style. I don't know how it can't, especially when you look at his art and see how strong that influence is. Oh my gosh, that's ugly.
This is supposed to be a Tim Drake comic.
Dude, he looks like a zombie. What is that?
It's Tim Drake, Robin
Kill it
number
with fire.
1. Yeah, it's
Kill it with fire.
It's one of the newer ones, but see, like this is like they took, like, the art doesn't look like manga. It looks like a early damn Archie comic.
Yeah, I was about to say it looks like Archie.
But this mannerism, this behavioral style, this person grew up on manga. At least the writer did. Maybe not the artist, and maybe the artist is good, and this is a miss. But we had the character design. That's what I'm trying to say. That's why I pulled this up. Mm-hmm. How do you go from this to this? How does that happen?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. So I know that's just one example, but that's what happened, I think, in a lot of stuff is in the colors. We already went through colors, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And as you made so eloquently a point, colors are how you can mess up great art very easily.
Granted, you can elevate art enormously with color, but
it's just another variable though. Like that can't go wrong.
With comics, I think that, and somebody pointed it out in the comments on our last video, and I 100% agree. I think some of this art just looks better on newsprint.
Mm-hmm. There's no getting around.
It just looks better on that, and you got that.
And those kind of faded colors.
Yeah,
look at that. I don't even know what this is, but this looks fantastic.
Well, you get those somewhat faded colors, but what you really get is the black outlines are not like hidden behind everything else. Like the colors are a lot of times halftone colors. They're more like little dots of color. If you zoom in real super duper close to them, you got those halftone colors on off-white paper, and the black ink outlines are allowed to really shine. And man, you just can't touch that.
Yeah.
And you can duplicate it digitally.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely duplicate that look digitally. And if you do it the right way, I think it looks a lot better than just a stark white background. Even these comic pages, when you see, like, click on that Fantastic Four image up there, go back up. That sort of splash page over there with the whole team beside the Superman.
Gotcha. Yep.
All right, pull that one up. 100% promise you that image looks better if you can see it on its original paper.
Even if it's yellowing. Yeah.
Yeah. 100% would look better on that yellowed paper. And maybe that's just nostalgia talking. I don't know. But
that sky would look so much better.
Yeah, I don't think those colors and line work, I don't think they look as good when they're remastered and put on like with the stark white over super saturated look. I think those things all look better back in the day when they were printed on cheap pulpy paper.
No, I think you're 100% right. Like, and this is crazy. I was going through an X Factor collection, like the original X Factor, and they had snuck in a crossover with Power Pack. And Power Pack was like a throwaway idea that they were like, we just got to get another book out, and it turned out to be really good because the writer, she was
Power Pack was dope.
But even like whoever, I don't know who the artist was, I should know, but like even for like this book that they didn't take too seriously, the art is fantastic, and it's like I wish I could find it, but it was like when they were helping X Factor fight Apocalypse or something. Power Pack, Apocalypse ship. I don't remember. That was the issue though. But anyway, yeah, that's it. That's the issue. But look at that art. That art's fantastic.
It's dynamic. It's fun. It's colorful. It's that's cool, man.
Yeah, I just remember just being like, this book that they thought was like a throwaway. It did really well. Art by John Bogdanov. I don't know how to say that name. But anyway. Yeah. I think the problem that, and a lot of people kind of harp on it, but don't really go into it like we are. They'll just be like, manga has better art, manga has better story, like that's why I'm doing it in pieces and big chunks.
Right.
I don't think manga has better art. I think they have a different style that people have accepted that allows for versatility. Because Junji Ito, there's nothing cute about his art. He doesn't. No. He doesn't include like the cat design. Like
it's much more realistic style.
Yeah,
and less stylized, at least in the
Berserk's the same way
human
too.
Anatomy. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at that, but you can still look at it and tell it's manga and not a comic. I really think, and the reason our American heroes sold so well worldwide is because we had the best character design for a long time until arguably Shonen got big, and that incorporated the cool adventure, like the Tom Sawyer type idea with the cute design. And I'm not saying Shonen is the best, but I'm saying worldwide marketing, sales wide, that's what
probably
did it.
The most popular.
That's what did it, though. It's like that's when they killed their design. They were like, okay, we've nailed international accepted character design. Yeah. It took a long time, but they did it.
It did, and a lot of experimentation, but they definitely did it.
The problem, I think, is people, and Sailor Moon had a big part of that, I will say. I think, I do think when people try to mimic that design in the format of American comics does not work well.
Yeah, I'd agree. And see, like, we say all of that, but, I want to talk about our book for a minute here at the end, just from as the artist of Godfrey Universe stuff. Apocalypse, Apollyon 20XX, which is the book we're working on right now. That's the one that I'm just going through edits at this point. Apollyon 20XX is black and white.
Yeah,
it is. We are 100% selling it as an American-made manga. Like that's how we're having it. That's how we're selling it to people. But I'm not trying to ape the chibi design, the cartoony eyes, Sailor Moon eyes.
Which are great. They work for what they work.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's anything wrong. I love that style, but I'm not trying to do that style. The lesson that I'm trying to take from the manga that I love, that has been such an inspiration for me, is knowing when to pull back on the background and let the action talk. So, one of the first things that, one of our good friends that we kind of shared the first chapter with, his response to it was like, it's really good. I really like it. the backgrounds are there's a lot of pages that don't have a lot of background. I was like, well, that's part, that's kind of by design too, just because when the action's happening, I want the focus to be on the action and the characters. That's a lesson that I've tried to learn from manga. I try to let black space really define form in my books, or at least in that book,
Mm-hmm.
and shading, be in there to really give depth and texture to things. And I've tried to avoid the just the boring panel layout composition that a lot of American comics
I think I lost you.
into
Yeah, there you
our
go.
American manga, but at the same time, um, I'm not trying to make something that looks like Akira. I'm not trying to make something that looks like Evangelion. I'm trying to make something that looks like Apollyon 20XX.
Yeah. Well, here, I'll share some of that.
All right, yeah. So like, there's detail in the background, but it's not extensive. Our characters are in the forefront. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of shading and stuff, and we're trying to let the action move the page, move your eye around the page. So yeah.
Let's see if I can find just a few more examples because a lot of people hadn't seen these. And you're still working on it, but you're almost done.
Yeah, at this point, I've got like a handful of pages in chapter 3 that I need to finish up. I'm mostly at the point of just going through and editing and adding any little bits and pieces to some of the old pages that I did a longer time ago, where maybe the characters are more defined for me now. But yeah.
All right, maybe I'll show one more on here if that's fine with you.
Yeah, dude. That
So,
one's fine.
what about this one right here?
That's fine. It don't matter.
What about Kolga?
All right, so Kolga, my approach to Kolga is completely different because Kolga is a full color comic. So with Kolga, I do have not as much of an manga influence. You and I have talked about Kolga has almost more of a Disney influence in a
Mm-hmm.
way. There's a certain amount of Disney princess in her design, mixed with, I guess, some of this Japanese influence. But Kolga is not nearly as oppressive with the dark shadows and things like that because I want room for color.
Yeah.
So Kolga is going to be kind of a different experience altogether.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear everybody's opinions on it. I just wanted to. I think this. I hate to say debate, but it's an interesting idea of manga and American comics, and I just feel like it's glossed over so much. Particularly, people want to get their quick 10-minute video out, and they want to keep like kind of tensions rising and flare rising because like a lot of them hate modern comics, and I don't I don't blame them. Modern comics are pretty trash, but
Some of them are, yeah, a lot of
yeah.
them are.
But I think these ideas deserve a more in-depth discussion. So
Yeah. So the next video, I guess we're going to talk kind of more about story
yeah, story, theme, that kind of
or
stuff.
writing, the way it's written. Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds awesome.
I think that's a great discussion to have. And any opinions, thoughts, whatever, blessings, curses, just leave them below. And we'll
Like, subscribe, share,
get ready for
go
Apollyon
join our
20XX.
mailing list, buy our crap.
Yeah, and how many pages is this volume 1 going to be, Josh?
It's around 200, man. It's big.
We're dropping a big fat comic.
A deuce.
And a novel, full length novel, it's completed and done. Music, short films. I mean, name it. We got it.
Yep.
So stick with us. We'll have a mailing list. We already have a mailing list you can go to at godfouniverse.com, sign up for. That's kind of like our project mailing list or whatever. So you can get in the know with that kind of stuff. And then we'll be launching a crowdfund, kind of like as like a test. We're gonna have it up on a store anyway. It's not gonna be limited. Like it's not like, oh, if it doesn't get funded, it's canceled. Like no, it's done. We're gonna sell it regardless. We don't believe in people having to wait for a crowdfunded issue.
Yeah.
So
Lots of cool stuff coming out, guys. Again, if you haven't subscribed to us down here or subscribe to us, follow us on Spotify if you're listening instead of watching. Any of that stuff, just follow, share, leave a review if that's something that you're able to do, and just try to get more eyes on this stuff. And if we're successful, it's mostly going to be because all of you get out there with the word of mouth and spread it around to people and share it. So we need you as much as you need us in this. If this is going to be successful, it's going to take everybody. We really appreciate everybody who has been taking this trip with us. It's awesome. We're excited to start releasing things in the very, very near future and seeing you guys at signings and conventions and things like that. We got PowerCon coming up in September in Florence, South Carolina. Dan's going to be there signing our books. I'm going to be in Japan while he's there. We got a lot of stuff coming out. Exactly. So we got a lot of stuff coming up and coming out. So just stick with us. We'll catch you on the next time.
Yep. See you.